Okay, so welcome, Christina Weaver. We're so excited to have you. Christina is currently living in, is it Northwest Carolina?
Western North Carolina.
Western North Carolina, and really kind of out in like the country.
Yes,
So exciting. Connection that I have with Christina that's very meaningful to me is that Christina did her graduate work at Indiana University, graduated in 2014. So as you all know, I did my undergrad there and just loved my mentors there, a really special time. And so I already know Christina and I that we share a real love of working perceptually and really a deep love for the figure, but also the landscape, working with Tim Kennedy and Eve Mansdorf, just really special experience. Christina also did her undergraduate work at PAFA, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And so we're all very familiar with that school. And so there's this sort of beautiful relationship that's happened over the years between IU and PAFA. And a big part of that is a real honoring and loving of the perceptual painting. So a really cool lineage and connection there. So we're so excited to hear from you, Christina. Just talking to you a little bit this morning, knowing that plein air is a fairly new endeavor for you. And so that's exciting for us because it's new for a lot of us too. And so hearing about your process with that is are really going to be very meaningful for us. So please,
alongside all of you.
Yay, yay. We're all learning. We're all in the laboratory, right? Learning
Awesome.
from nature. So Christina, you can go ahead and transition to your screen share.
Okay. Let's see if I can. All right. And are y'all seeing the images there?
Yes. Can we get a thumbs up, peeps, that you can see it? Great.
All right. Am I ready to begin?
Yes, let's go for it.
All right, so first off, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kimberly, and thank you so much to all of you for giving me some time here to come and talk to you about my process and my work, a little bit about my story. So before I begin talking about the plein air paintings I've been doing, I think it's important to back up and share a little bit about the work I was doing about 5 to 6 years prior. So these are two paintings that I did in graduate school. And during this time, I had started working with fabrics and papers and these other kind of decorative materials that I had accumulated in my studio and was using them as kind of these compositional elements or devices to kind of talk about painting issues and design ideas. Of course, like color interaction, texture, movement, form, light. And through these explorations, the work became pretty abstract. Let's see here. This is another piece I did during that time, and it's called Ascension, and it's a direct reference to the late Renaissance paintings of Pontormo. I was thinking particularly about his large epic deposition painting. And I was kind of calling on the sugary palette that he used and the kind of anti-gravity of those compositions. And there are these tangles of figures and bodies, and he uses fabric to kind of weave the composition together and move the eye throughout. And so I was kind of wondering what would happen if I pulled the figure out and what I'd be left with, and just wanted to explore that movement, the light, the color.
Incredible, beautiful piece.
Thank you. And then the paintings became kind of more landscape-like. And I was using the materials to kind of directly reference sky and earth and water elements. And I was thinking, for example, on the painting on the left, like, what would happen if I kind of mashed up like an ice cave with the desert? Or the painting on the right, referencing the prismatic pools of Yellowstone. My husband and I had just taken a big trip out west, and we'd seen these beautiful rich colors of the desert and these kind of otherworldly landscape features. So yeah, just thinking about these more as landscapes, thinking a little bit about deeper space and how to kind of create the illusion or evoke that.
Mm.
And these are a couple setups that I put together in my studio.
Wonderful.
And they became pretty elaborate, and they became almost like these sculptures or installation pieces in and of themselves. The lighting became very theatrical. I was pulling in colored lights and creating, again, trying to create like more physical depth and space to paint. And again, referencing very clearly these landscape ideas like ice, volcanoes, clouds. And these are the two paintings that resulted from those two setups. And then my husband and I just picked up not too long after I was doing that work and relocated to Western North Carolina. So deep in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains and Appalachia. And we moved to a piece of land there. And it's just surrounded by farms and rolling hills. So a big change. And so I wasn't looking at landscapes in the studio anymore. Now I was looking at them all around me in person. And then within that same year, our son was born.
Oh, cute. Oh.
And parenting is, of course, an all-consuming, exhausting task. And so there wasn't a ton of time for painting. I had to put that aside for a little bit. But I did make this one painting in 2018, right after he was born. And I kind of look back on this as, well, a first attempt at landscape, but also kind of a way for me through painting to become acquainted with my new home, and a way to very kind of like literally with the painting of the tree, kind of like root myself in this new place. And this tree, if we look out our front window, it's completely obstructing the view. It was kind of like a poor landscape design choice. But like as a compositional element of painting, I found it really fascinating because, you know, your eye can kind of move through these branches to the deep space behind. So instead of these kind of working with these costume landscapes that I was creating in the studio where there was limited depth and I was creating the illusion of depth, here I was dealing with real space.
I love that term, costume landscape. That's amazing.
Very theatrical
Yes.
approach there. And the following year, I was able to get into the studio finally again. And this is the painting I made. And both of these are a foot by a foot, well, a foot at most in any direction. So they're relatively small.
Yeah.
And this painting, both of these were done looking outside my studio windows. And looking at this now, it feels a little bit more like a document of this place as opposed to dealing with painting issues, if that makes sense. So it feels a little bit tentative, a little more like almost like a graphite drawing or something, more about like getting information and again, getting to know my surroundings more than dealing with this as a painting. And then one day I looked outside on the ground and I saw this little like nugget of life, this little daffodil popping up. I didn't know this plant was there. And it just came up, and I loved kind of the potential of the buds, the potential life there. And I wanted to capture that energy. And this painting is really little, it's 5 by 5 inches, but I got something, and I think achieved something with this painting that I wanted to kind of carry with me into the landscape work that I did later. It feels very fresh and direct. And I was just mixing color and placing it and not messing with it too much, wasn't fussing. And so these are the next two studies that I did. Also pretty small. The one on the right's like 12 by 12, 9 by 12 on the left, something like that.
Wow.
And I think I was starting to pull in some of those more energetic marks and thinking about kind of like massing together colors and shapes and simplifying a little bit more. And also becoming acquainted with the color green. I'd never really painted green before. And so that was a challenge, a new one.
Christina, what are the surfaces?
So the surfaces, I'll talk about that in a little bit. These ones are, I think they're both linen on panel. They're either linen on panel glued to it or just directly on oil prime panel. So yeah, just looking around at different views. Again, these are still, this is done either in my studio, and one of these was done out on the porch. So I'm still like physically like touching the house. I'm like still craving kind of the safety, or wanting the safety of the studio. I haven't fully moved to the plein air experience yet. A few more studies that I did over the one on the right actually was done a year later, but I just wanted to show this idea of a changing palette with the season. So September working to October, the rich kind of greens of late summer, working into these kind of dusty pink, coppery fall colors, and then the like heart of fall, the golden kind of October palette. So another one done looking out the window. So this is the same painting in two different stages, and how the right image is how it ended up. So the painting was begun in the summer of 2019, and my time with the green ran out because the fall season came. And so I came to this crossroads in the painting where I had to make a decision. I could either, leave the painting as it was, wait until the next summer to finish, or I could adapt the painting to the changing surroundings. And I chose the latter option and let the fall color kind of emerge in the painting. So a painting done over time, a little bit more time taken here. Probably, I guess, yeah. Oh yeah, it was like 2 months. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my palette. So to address this new world of green that I was dealing with, I kind of brought in a couple new colors. So I added that phthalo turquoise and Indian yellow onto my palette so I could create a greater variety and range of greens. So it's a pretty classic setup. I have kind of a warm and cool of the primaries, and then titanium white. And sometimes I have umber on my palette for an underpainting. And I work exclusively with flats and filbert brushes. They kind of create a great versatility of mark. And then I put the medium that I use on there. Right now I'm using the artist painting medium. It's all right. I still haven't found a favorite medium yet, I think. And here's an image of my surfaces in process of being made. So again, I either work on oil primed panel or linen glued to panel and then oil primed or stretched oil primed linen.
Okay.
And if you all have like any questions while I'm talking, feel free to kind of jump in if you feel like I gloss over something or you want me to readdress something.
Oh, can you talk about that medium? I'm not familiar. What is that medium? Is it a combination of something?
Honestly, I'm not exactly sure what it's what it is. It's a very like liquidy. It's almost. Have you used Liquin?
Oh, we haven't, but I've heard of it. We're using OMS and linseed or gal kit, something like that. So.
Yeah, well, this medium is it's like dries. It's a quick drying medium, and it lends a little bit of glossiness and fluidity to the paint. And so it's a very liquid medium as opposed to like a gel, which maybe you've worked with. I don't know. It sounds like you guys are making your own medium, which is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I'll chime in. Sue, I have this one. I think it's stand oil and petroleum distillate. Very simple.
Is that
I think it has a little bit of the Lamar varnish in it.
Yeah, I think it has a little Damar in it too, which smells really good, but strong.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that for me.
thank you. Yeah.
Great.
Cool.
And so I brought a little bit of the outside in, and wanted to paint these plants that were kind of iconic to me and represented the area. The rhododendron on the left, and then these buttercups and blackberry stem in the right that I just kind of picked out of the yard. These things grow wild here. And if you've ever been to the Smoky Mountain National Park in summer, when the rhododendrons are blooming, they create the most like gorgeous wall of magenta pink that's just absolutely stunning. So again, I saw painting this rhododendron as creating this new kind of connection to this place that we moved to.
I'm curious where you moved from.
So, gosh, we've lived in so many places in the past few years. Most recently, it would have been Mississippi. I was teaching there. I was teaching at Mississippi State University for a little while. And then we just, again, kind of just picked up and made a big change and
fun.
And
you
super fun.
Grew up in Alabama though, right?
I grew up in Alabama. So yeah, I grew up coming to these mountains as a kid. So they were very familiar to me. So it felt in a sense kind of like coming home and moving here.
Wonderful.
So another painting done outside the studio window, looking down at the ground. And this one had a similar kind of freshness to that first daffodil painting, the juiciness to the paint. It felt deliberate, felt more confident. And then I got this wonderful opportunity to do a show, but these fabric paintings were requested. And so I moved back inside and pulled out all the old props and got out my lights and started making a few setups. And these are the paintings that came of it. This pair that I kind of was thinking about, like sunrise, sunset, and something about like the tumultuous weather of spring. We were moving towards spring. So still trying to address the outside world, even though I was cooped up in the studio.
Uh-huh. Oh.
Let's see, I think I skipped one. That was another piece for that show.
Look like you're bringing more green in.
Oh yeah, yeah, maybe so.
Could you maybe speak to how you keep track of the folds and the crinkles and the darks and the lights?
Yeah, sure. I mean, not so different from working out in the landscape, where I think you kind of have to just find these anchors, whether that's like a big shape, like that shadow kind of in the bottom, or kind of a big shape of light on the top of the fabric, and just kind of reorient yourself to that every time you look back at the setup. Just, yeah, finding shape anchors and color anchors.
Okay.
This is beautiful. This looks like Mount Rainier to me. I mean,
I love that.
the relative value here, the really like narrow range of value in this is just beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, the kind of neutral shadows that you're getting that still have a lot of really luminous color inside of them. Really incredible color mixing, Christina.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I wanted just lightness in the paintings. I wanted to make light paintings. I don't know why exactly. And especially with this next one, I was like moving gradually toward just a white painting.
That's so amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was shocked to see that this was oil. Like it could be a gentle graphite drawing, or it's really something.
Well, with this painting, I actually felt like I kind of hit a wall. So COVID hit while I was working on this painting, and I had been working on it for like a couple months, and it just kept going, and it became kind of like a grind to like visit this painting in the studio every day. And I felt like it really like wasn't getting worse or better, and it wasn't changing that much. And I kind of felt like I was lost at sea, and it became this kind of symbol of the times for me. This idea of being isolated, kind of emptiness, and being lost a little bit, given all the things that were going on in 2020. So I very enthusiastically moved outside when I had that show off. And
she's out of the gate.
Looked back since. I won't say I'll never go back, but I made this shift where I actually got out onto the grass. I wasn't physically touching the house. I wasn't looking through the window. And the experience was completely different when you're actually in the elements and you feel the rain drizzling on you and you feel the sun beating down your neck and it's windy and you're afraid your palette's going to fall over and your painting's going to fly off. You know, all those kind of plein air painting issues that you have to juggle. That was completely new. And I started out by doing just a series of very small still studies. These are all like 5 by 5 inches. Just trying to nail down something about the light, learning how to mass together complex forms. There's just this chaos of information that's coming at you, overwhelming amounts of information. And I think, you know, I was trying to find a balance between giving particulars and the cohesion of the painting. Slightly different months, slightly different palettes, turning my head this way and that, looking for different views and moments in the landscape. A few more studies I did during that time. These were all 2020, summer and into fall.
Beautiful. And these are still pretty small.
They are. These are all small. So 9 inches probably max in any one direction.
I am blown away by that. That's crazy to me. Like because it's not like you're zoomed in here. You're dealing with an enormous amount of space.
Yeah. And part of that is practical. I started small because it felt comfortable. And I started small because I still had kind of limited time to paint. My son was still little, and I knew I could kind of get a painting done in a session if they were small. But yeah, just investigations of light at different times of day, different seasons.
Christina, on that note that you said, you know, time-wise, like being efficient, are these all one-shot paintings or do you return to them?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So these are either 1 or 2 shot paintings. These guys are all like 3 hours. And some of these were 2 shot, like the one in the upper left, actually all of these I think are 2 shot paintings. So like 6 hours max, something like that.
Yeah.
Zooming in a little bit at this hosta plant that's behind our house. These are also small. These are like 3 by 5 or 5 by 7 inch paintings, and dealing with kind of different scales of the plant, zooming into the flowers, zooming out, looking at the foliage. And then this painting was a multi-session painting, I think maybe 5, maybe 6 sessions. And I wanted to address these farm structures that are on our street. We have this series of beautiful big red barns on our road that are very iconic for this place. And so I was using those in this painting to think a little bit about scale and to kind of place the human element in. But more than that, I was looking at the colors on the hill. And so you look at the hills around here and they're just set like
Christina's frozen for me. Is she for you guys too?
Yes.
How to collapse a range of values in order to create atmosphere. So the mountain.
Christina, will you say that again? You were frozen for a minute. Uh-oh, frozen again.
You may have to turn off her own video.
Are we back?
For once, it's not me on the island.
Are we back?
I can hear you now, Christina. Yes.
Oh my gosh. We had a storm here. I wonder if my internet's cutting out. I am so sorry.
That's okay.
No worries.
Let's see.
I think you got to transition back into screen share. Yep, wow. There you go.
Is that it? Are we back?
Yes.
My
and
apologies.
I really want to hear what you were saying, though. You were just launching into talking about the colors of that hillside.
Okay, so I then was talking a little bit about the collapse of value that happens as the mountain gets farther away from you, and the creation of kind of air in a painting through contrast in the foreground and a kind of dynamic range of values, and then that kind of compression of values in the distance. So again, creating atmosphere and air.
Wonderful.
Same kind of concerns with this painting. This is the view out front. That last one was the view out back. So addressing this kind of very rolling up and down feel of the hills here. It's almost like looking out and like being on an ocean or something. And looking at the kind of, or creating atmosphere with that collapse of values in the distance, minimal information, and then bringing the information and value range up as you get closer into the viewer.
Wonderful.
And this painting, these last few are done over a few sessions. And this painting became a mix of weather situations. So I started this painting while it was overcast and rainy and drizzly and misty. And then in like the last 5 minutes, the sun came out, and I knew that I just like grabbed that bit of blue sky. I knew that's what I needed to finish this painting. So yeah, sometimes nature just kind of provides the answer for you.
Yes. In fact, doesn't she always?
Always.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's not sometimes, it's pretty much always.
Yes.
So these were all done, while we were all dealing with coronavirus and dealing with isolation. And so to keep kind of sane and to keep our mental health, now my kid was old enough that we could go and do a lot of exploring and a lot of outdoor time on the property. And when you spend time with a little kid, you see the world anew. Everything is fascinating. Everything is exciting. Every little bug crawling on the ground and the feel of grass and all those things. And so I was noticing the ground a lot more and looking more at these little patches of the yard. And here he is making a little bouquet of dandelions. That's one of his favorite activities.
Have you painted that? That's adorable.
I have not actually done a painting of him yet. I'm building up to that. But I did paint the dandelions. So this is the first of a series where I'm zooming in very close to the earth and just kind of getting lost to this kind of bug's eye view, getting lost in like the minutia of a patch of yard. So I did some more of those paintings.
Wow.
And this is, I think, over the span of like a year. And with each of these paintings, a different kind of goal emerged. So say the painting in the bottom right, that painting became all about geometry and shape of the leaves and the forms. And then the painting in the upper left, kind of soft and more delicate. So I thought of these as kind of these portraits of the dandelions. And I also painted them in the gone to seed state and did a small series of those. And this really was an exercise in prioritization because this little seed head's gonna fly off any minute, especially here. It's very windy. The wind sweeps through these hills. And so I knew, that I wanted to get that in there. So I locked that in and then kind of developed the rest of the painting around that. And I liked how some of them feel kind of ephemeral and ghostly, and then some of them feel more orb-like and solid, just depending on what the light did and what the weather is doing or what the situation was. Again, just kind of getting nestled in during this time to these tiny moments in the landscape. And I loved how, this is like, I'm looking at a patch of ground at the edge of my porch that's maybe like 5 by 5 inches. And that's the size of the painting. It's kind of life size. And the way this creeping Charlie weed just kind of floated onto the porch and cast these gorgeous little shallow shadows. Love the shapes there.
Oh, wonderful. Oh.
The same subject, painted in 2 different ways. The image on the right, much more about shape and form and solidity and a softness, the painting on the left. And, you know, using the brush to physically manipulate the paint and blur edges to create kind of a softness and effect. So just kind of learning a language for painting through the doing of these things and the explorations that I was indulging in here. And, you know, sometimes you would get this kind of no-brainer situation in the landscape where there's a pop of color that has this irresistible contrast, this coral orange flowers versus the green and the kind of dusty wood of the light post.
And that wonderful vertical and then creating the dark behind that coral color, that division is pretty irresistible.
Yeah, I wanted to see what would happen when I kind of like bisected a painting and see if I could kind of work with that and let the plants kind of weave together these 2 halves of the painting.
Can I ask a question about that black? Are you mixing your own black, or are you mixing a contrasting color into that black to help bring that red out?
It's an opaque mixture that I'm laying right on top. So that's probably some mixture of my like phthalo and maybe a little bit of Indian yellow and alizarin or something like that. So yeah, that is a mixed dark.
I'm interested in the tertiary, like orangish colors in the lower left-hand corner, like maybe the buds that haven't blossomed yet. Yeah, those weird unnameable colors. Those are
unnameable. Exactly it, Kimberly. That's exactly right. You have to kind of like find those colors.
Those are always my favorite. I just love them. Me too. I can tell in your paintings. That's one of the reasons I'm so attracted to the work is the subtlety of those tertiaries.
Thank you.
Ooh, nice.
And just here I was making a painting about green. I wanted a painting that just epitomized summer. This was just done in the full swing of growth and green. And I wanted to capture that buttery light that you get when you're looking at the undersides of green leaves, those kind of hot greens like in here. And then the top planes of the leaves catch these gorgeous like lavenders and blues.
You're speaking my language, sisterhood.
I know, kindred spirits. I know.
Gosh, yes. I mean, it's like we look at this and it's like, that is impossible to paint, right? It's just green. How do you make a painting out of it, right? And then the whole process is just like finding the differences between those greens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you start to pull it apart, there's a world of color.
Yes.
What do you think your palette was?
What was that?
What do I think my palette was? Your palette for that? Yeah.
Well, it probably would have been a little bit of everything that I showed in that photo earlier. So I can't say exactly. I mean, I think this one's probably pretty like cadmium heavy. Lots of those kind of light lemon cadmium yellows. Definitely a little bit of phthalo turquoise in there. And that's a color you have to be so careful with. I mean, that is like, I don't know what y'all have on your palette, but that color is just permeates everything. So
yeah. No, amazingly, your palette is very similar to ours, like very high chromatic palette, like no earth colors really, just like the cads, the phthalos.
Yeah. And for this painting, this one, I think is like 8 by 8, still pretty small. There weren't really any anchors in what I was looking at. So no elements that kind of held still that I could keep returning back to. And so the process of this was just kind of like seeing a little shape, and it's almost like grabbing it like out of the setup and placing it on the canvas and just like hoping that they kind of all add up. But I think I got like something of the kind of swirling movement of the plant blowing in the wind, and kind of the rhythm and pattern of what I was seeing. Another elusive subject that was just constantly being blown by the wind, in motion, moving.
Oh, sorry.
And at the edge of the yard, there's this kind of jungle of weeds that gets completely overgrown in the summer months. And I am drawn to the complexity of that and wanted to tackle that. And there was this Queen Anne's lace that was kind of emerging and falling away as I was painting this painting over the course of a few sessions. And I kind of thought of these flowers as these like fireworks that would kind of emerge slowly and then kind of fizzle out. And so I liked how this painting kind of addressed the different life stages of the flower. And here's kind of a play-by-play of one way that I approach a painting. So starting with a very loose drawing and kind of, in this case, building the painting kind of from the middle out and laying in mixed patches of color. Again, a prioritization exercise. I knew that the tomatoes were gonna change, they were going to ripen, they were going to fall off. My son was going to pick them off. So I wanted to nail those down. And then I knew I'd be able to kind of breathe a little bit and be able to address the stone and brick and the stake that was holding up the tomatoes at the end. And here's the final painting of that close-up.
Beautiful.
Christina, are you using graphite for the sketch?
In that painting, I actually normally do, I just sketch with paint. But in this case, I pulled out the pencil. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised to see that.
Yeah, that's not typical.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think the subject matter maybe lent itself to that it's so like such clear clusters of form versus the more ephemeral
maybe
feel
so.
you're usually doing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever take photos of the thing that you're working on that you know that you're gonna lose it, or do you just work from?
I don't. I find that kind of the process and the experience of being there with the subject is the reason for making the painting. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like if I work from a photo, I'm completely disconnected from that experience. And not that photos can be incredibly useful tools. I'm not, I don't think you're like, I think sometimes people are kind of purists about working from life, working from photo, and I much prefer to work from life. But yeah, I think that the experience is as important as the final image, if not more, with this work.
Yeah.
So I was looking down a lot, looking at the ground. I was craving the sky. Looked up, caught these little quarter-sized apples that were on the scrubby tree on the hill. Didn't even know they were there. Asters kind of addressed in different ways. I feel like the way they're painted on the left, it's much more about form, it's about shape, it's about geometry, and on the right, a kind of a cascade and rhythm of the entire mass of flowers moving across the surface. And this is a photo of just some of the magic that happens on our street at this time of year. This is like late summer.
Oh, wow.
And so yeah, these plants get so tall, they get like up to your shoulders. And so I wanted to do some very vertical compositions that kind of captured the verticality of that experience and the kind of claustrophobia of walking through these fields and having these plants kind of closing in on you. Mm-hmm. And I like looking at these two together because the one on the left, I like looking at the way the sky is addressed. So the one on the left, the sky feels kind of distant and nebulous. And it has kind of, this painting has on the left, the classic situation of the subject being close and the sky being far. And then sometimes the sky here is so blue and so dense that it feels like it's like closing in on you, and it feels like closer to you than the earth. And so I wanted to paint the sky on the right with the blue being kind of like the positive shape at the top there, and then the plants being kind of like the negative shape that fall back, if that makes sense. And so learning kind of
that's wonderful.
Like a language for making that happen in the painting. And also I think I was getting more confident at leaving kind of these initial kind of scrubby, transparent passages in the painting, let those sit as part of the final image, particularly in the painting on the right.
Yeah, on that painting in the upper left, yeah, seeing that more kind of scrubby, transparent, kind of Indian yellow, and then having the more opaque blue cut in. That's really nice.
That was really fun to paint, that little that little piece right there, that little golden.
It looks like it.
Transitioning into fall color, looking down, looking up again, looking all over, down in the grass, up to the trees. And sometimes when I paint really low on the ground, I actually sit on a picnic blanket. I'm like in the grass. Addressing fall color and getting that kind of windswept feel again, movement, rhythm of the leaves as they were kind of falling off the tree, flying away, just kind of catching them, and catching these observations and placing them in the painting as I see them. It's almost like sometimes, like by the time I get to the painting, the observation's already a memory because the thing's just completely gone.
Such an interesting comment you made on one of your Instagram paintings of grass recently, where you said there's probably like, I painted the same blade of grass over and over and over again.
Yes, exactly. That's the experience though, right? It's just like the painting became kind of like it becomes kind of a collage of experiences, or like a tapestry.
It was really meaningful to me too.
Yeah, because the wind kept moving that blade, and so it's like
right. So you just have to kind of just like commit to something, or you won't have a painting, right? So just kind of committing and preserving some things that you've seen, and then painting over others, and just letting the painting exist again as just evidence of an experience.
It so conveys. It's mind blowing. Yes, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. That same tree, if you look in the photo, there's like, I was painting out there in the summer and I heard this buzzing above me, and I looked up and right above my head was this hornet's nest. And so I painted that. And as the palette of the land transitioned into winter, you would think that you would lose the color, but it's just as rich as the summer and spring and fall months. This is just looking into a tangle of dried out leaves and getting kind of lost in there and finding a huge range of color that kind of emerges as it's painted.
Christina, on those last two, I can't tell if it's just the screen or it looks like there are, especially the hornet's nest, there are more areas that are more transparently painted. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, yeah. So a lot of the time, and I'll show some examples of this. I know I'm actually, let me check my time. I know I'm getting, wow, okay. Yeah, so a lot of the time I'll kind of start by just scrubbing in huge areas of color. And I'm beginning to like the effect it creates when I just leave those areas and then lay kind of opaque shapes on top to kind of carve out forms that are described by those first marks, if that makes sense. So yeah, absolutely. Those are kind of more in the upper left and bottom right and kind of all over. Yeah, you see kind of these transparent, scrubby areas of paint. I'll try to move more quickly here. A couple iterations of the same, this is the same painting, a couple years apart. I kept like revisiting this painting and taking things out and painting over. and I actually shifted my body to a new location to actually cut out that, we call that the painting on the left and the upper right part of that painting. There's this tree that we call the Halloween tree because it looks like a Halloween, and it's like so cheesy looking. And so it doesn't sit well in a painting at all, but that's how it really looks. So I wanted to like get rid of that, and I ended up with kind of another new Halloween tree. I was trying to get this new tree that was in the foreground. And so that presented a problem. So yeah, just thinking about different things that you kind of gain or lose in changing a painting. And I actually want to work back into this one this November. I'm gonna start flipping through some images here.
Delicious. This is a great example, Maureen, too, of that transparency versus opacity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to show this one as an example of the development of a specific painting language that felt particular to me, where I am allowing those passages to sit, finding a shorthand for certain textures, like those rocks, those transparent parts that we were talking about. A quick process shot.
Wonderful.
Where I did a full kind of under painting.
Oh, this is great to see. Thank you. It's so generous to show this.
Absolutely.
Christina, for something like that, are you basically capturing every leaf? But you're not editing out much information, right?
No, I would say that I am very much simplifying certain areas or letting like a texture kind of stand in for foliage or leaf. Like in this, like in the upper left-hand corner of this painting, there was kind of a patch of rosemary that I really oversimplified. And I think that partly has to do with me wanting to not take away from kind of the main event here too. But yeah, I think there's definitely simplification going on here. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think just your drawing skills of the foliage is just amazing. And I know there's editing going on, but still, like the delineation using paint of individual pieces, right, of the leaves is it's just beautiful. So I just wanted to get a sense of are you looking at the specific individual leaves? Or are you compositing them in your head partly?
Yeah, so I'm definitely grouping them together in these masses because I think that's kind of the way I see it. So trying to think how best to answer that. I think that, you don't always have to show every edge and every line in order to get the impression of form. And I would say that this is simplified a good deal. Again, I don't know if that's a really good answer. I need to get back to you on that. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, it seems like in the image on the far right here is a really good indication, I think, Ying, of that process of like grouping most of the leaves together into that green and then starting to carve in with some of the darker shadow shapes that start to then delineate some of the individuals, but not all the individuals necessarily have to be delineated. But I think that they are all there as part of that larger mass. Like, Christine, I don't think you're
Kimberly. I think that I'm thinking about them more in terms of like grouping the light as opposed to grouping the leaves. And then if the light is observed in a way that's and painted in a way that's kind of faithful to what you're seeing, I think all that information kind of falls into place and the eye kind of fills in what you would think might be missing.
Yeah, it's like having faith in the value shapes, right? That it's like you don't need to name each leaf, but if you put in all the shapes of light and dark, they're all there.
Yeah, right. Changing up composition, creating an obstruction right here that we have to move around. I did a lot of like kind of vignette paintings and centering things, mixing up composition, finding color in winter this little plant was incredibly like vigorous and full of life, and it got snowed on like 5 times and it just like kept coming back. So I painted its portrait.
It's like an octopus.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the one.
Visiting the rhododendron in the landscape as opposed to bringing the blossoms into the studio. And this plant is so dark. It's almost like spooky how dark it is. And the leaves just kind of like emerge and fade away as you're looking. And just like all of these subjects, there's just so much color to be found in there once you start looking. You think it's kind of like dusty and again, kind of like a non-color, and there's so much to be found. Blues and purples, and of course, those kind of acid olivey greens where the light's filtering through. Occasionally when it was really cold or raining, I'd bring the painting back inside and do still life. And in February of 2021, especially after this past winter of isolation and, felt particularly long because of what we were all dealing with. And I was just really craving the green of the garden, craving green generally, wanted to be outside. So I painted this little bit of store-bought green. And here's the painting that you were referring to with the blades of grass that were, that were captured in a number of positions. So I wanted to show the three of the multiple different stages of this painting to talk a little bit about how you gain and you lose something as you continue to work on a painting. So the first iteration on the left, there was a freshness that I loved, but it was missing some of the movement of that grass. So I pulled that in. And then I felt like I didn't quite have some of the greens that I was longing for, and the bottom portion of that painting hadn't been addressed. And so I pulled in more information, but looking back, I feel like I kind of lost some of that freshness. So again, it's a bit of a gamble, every move that you make in any painting, but in particular in these landscape paintings, because you can't get a situation back once it's gone. So you can either make a choice to preserve it or let it go.
Yes.
So this painting, more than some of the others maybe, felt like it got to something of like the spirit of this plant. The leaves felt like these shards or like swords coming up out of the ground to me, and kind of showed the violence of spring. And I wanted to leave kind of a little bit of space at the top of the painting for potential growth, and to emphasize the kind of verticality of the movement of the plant. And then there's this relief when the blossoms finally come out, and there was like a butteriness to the painting of this.
Delicious.
And it's just joyful to finally have spring emerge and to be able to indulge in the painting of these flowers.
And Christina, if you'll go back to that one, the color and value of the petals that's actually darker than the center of the flower itself, that, to mix that particular, what we see as the color white, but it's not white at all,
Right.
that those petals have to be knocked down a bit. That's just so masterful. I love that.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. I think it helps when I'm painting to name, if I can't identify a color, I put a word to it. Like I name it in my head. If like a prismatic color, I'm like, okay, if I had to name it, that's green. Or it's yellow, if I had to choose a rainbow color. And then I kind of go from there and I say, okay, I know that needs to be neutralized. So I'm gonna grab for the complement. I know that needs to be lighter. I'm gonna grab for this color on the palette. So yeah, that's kind of where I start when I don't know where to go with the color.
I so relate to that. I have an expression where I'm like, if there's a gun to your head, is it red, orange, yellow, green, blue, or violet? And you can't say gray and you can't say brown.
Yeah, it helps to just name the prismatic color.
Yes. I also want to just point out on that one and also the one before it, just to the group here, looking at, the space on the top of this painting, like all the different manifestations of greens that are happening there as the space that's supporting the main event that, you know, I think so often people can just make a blanket statement and just fill in that whole area as one thing. And then it becomes this really unactive kind of dead space. But to really be faithful, like you are being, to analyzing, well, really, what is the color that creates the negative and the relationship with the thing next to it? And that not taking that for granted, that that's changing at every stage in the same way that going into the plant itself and being really faithful to it, that those patches of color that create the environment is so important.
Right.
And like,
I think it's absolutely, because yeah, these things are defined as much by what they are not as what they are.
It's like they're mutually dependent on each other.
Absolutely.
And so then in the next one with the white flowers, that whole passageway up the right-hand side of the painting, I want everyone to notice that, like, not taking for granted just a background color, like for those petals to work, every little centimeter of space, is it a more purplish tone? Is it a more greenish tone? Is it more neutral? Is it more saturated? Is it darker? That is all such important work. It's also very Cezannian.
Oh, I like that. Well, I think that if you stop, I was talking about naming colors, but if you don't name forms, like say, now I'm painting a flower, now I'm painting a leaf, and just think more abstractly about looking at these things as color interactions and shapes, then you don't get so caught up on like, oh, this is the background, and it's like unimportant in your mind, whereas the flower is super important, right? So I think just trying to get rid of the form labels that can help in finding specificity in areas you wouldn't normally focus on. I loved how these kind of sat on the plant, like just like a little flock of yellow birds or something. The color's so saturated that they almost look like cut out in the landscape. These little
And I love how so many of their petals are actually green, but we're reading them as yellow.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the kind of transparency lended them a greenness.
Wonderful.
Just to show kind of the scale of what I'm looking at, I was on the picnic blanket here, and you can see that little tiny weed next to the railroad tie there, that little dead nettle plant. Just looking at a few inches by a few inches in the landscape. And the painting is to scale. So it's all, again, most of these paintings are small. I haven't been talking much about sizes, but most of them at most are, a foot by a foot, something like that. This painting, I'd been kind of zooming in on the dandelion flowers, and I wanted to address the entire plant as a whole. And it was just, this plant was bursting forth with life this spring. And I liked the kind of, again, I talked about the violence of that daffodil painting a few slides ago, but this also felt like these leaves were just like these weapons and like these knives and shards that were kind of just kind of projecting outward. And I wanted to just fill the surface with this image. So it felt like it was bursting at the seams, kind of like the life of this plant. Here's a little progress shot of that one and what I'm looking at there on the ground. I just have a few more slides. I know I'm running over here. Pardon me for that.
We are happy for every minute with you, dear. So.
Well, this little scene was at the edge of the yard this spring, and it just kind of meant spring for me. The color palette, the dandelion nestled among this kind of carpet of purple flocks that felt like they could just fly off at any moment. And with my paint application, I wanted it to be very direct, very light, not fussy, not going back in and messing with things, just kind of like gut reaction painting and getting something of the kind of lightness and freshness of the season. The setup for this dogwood painting, looking up again. And I liked how the flowers kind of fractured the space of the sky confused it. And I think the painting also became very kind of like fragmented and chaotic, and I kind of liked that. And this is getting very close to the present. So this painting is a little bit bigger. This one was like, 1.5 by 2 feet, something like that. And I had kind of the opposite approach of the tomato painting I showed with this one, where I was building kind of the anchor and the scaffolding first of this tree trunk, and then building the leaves on top. I had kind of this grand plan for this painting where I was gonna time it just right so I could put all the leaves in, and then the blossoms would come out. And the blossoms never came because we had a couple hard freezes, and the little buds just like shriveled and just fell off of the plant. And so I decided to instead focus more on kind of the shapes of the leaves and the way the sky was kind of cutting through and carving out those moments, especially there at the top. And this is what's on the easel right now. So this painting is 4 by 4 feet.
Ooh.
So scaling way up, and I'm feeling like I need to physically be immersed in the painting more. I want it around my vision to be kind of swallowed by the painting as I'm working on it. I'm also wanting to see what happens when I stick with something over a long period of time. So I don't know where this is headed, but this is what's on the easel right now.
Exciting.
So that is the end of my images, and I don't know if we have any time for questions or what.
If you are okay with that, we would love to ask you some questions.
Continue talking, to you all. Please.
Christina, do you want to exit screen share so we can kind of see each other a little bit more? We can get into gallery view here. Yeah. Firstly, thank you so much for the generosity of sharing your images and your process with us. It is a huge gift to hear from you.
Thank you. That was a delight to be able to, and like we talked privately, but it helps me organize my thoughts for the studio as well.
That's the hope. Yes, is that you can use this as a springboard for kind of understanding your own narrative, and you're just the perfect person for us to hear from, while we're really diving into and thinking about the lifestyle of what it means to be a plein air painter, and how you've really used the plein air experience as a way to get to know the place that you're at, this kind of new home that you're in. And so that it's never just about painting, it's about having a better life. And I think that your work and your personhood, you really exude that. And that's very inspiring.
That's really beautifully put, Kimberly. Thank you.
Would love to hear some questions from the group. I have a lot of questions, but I want you guys, please ask away.
I want to ask, do you scrape between sessions?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I scrape, sometimes I sand, but most of the time I just let the new paint sit right on top of the previous layers. And any of the sort of textured areas you see are mostly those like initial kind of underpainting marks that just have the canvas kind of showing through. They're kind of scrubby.
So you would be dry when you put on when you go into a new session? Mostly dry?
Most of the time, yes.
And partly that has to do with the medium you're using too, right? So even if it's the next day?
Yes, it speeds up the drying.
That's good to know.
I had a question about your setups with looking closely at things, because from the pictures, it looks like you're close to it, but you're not like in its face or anything. It's still kind of a step away. I'm wondering if that kind of was just like the natural distance that you found, or if you do it on purpose to help you kind of generalize the values and everything.
That's a really good question. That has actually changed a little bit. I mentioned that sometimes I get really low and sit on a picnic blanket. I've actually been doing that a little more, because sometimes it felt like when I painted from above, it felt a little bit too much like not quite being immersed in what I was looking at. But Yeah, I don't know. I think I get close enough that I'm able to find enough information. And I think that's a really good point about being far enough away still to be able to generalize. And I think that's right. I think that's true. Yeah.
This was super helpful for me to remember that I could go small and I can go close. I don't have to be doing this big, huge thing because I'm overwhelmed by it anyway. So to go back and start small and find the shape or the shadow as the anchor is super helpful. So thank you so much for your time.
Hey, sure. Well, now I'm going big. So, but no, I think, but it's important to, I think it's important to do both, and mix it up a little and push yourself a little this way and that. And yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think too, seeing Christina go small, though, it's like, oh my gosh, all the complexity that's there is like, that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my gosh, the whole universe is in one little dandelion leaf,
Yes. Right.
It's incredible. Other questions, you guys, about process, about setup, about surfaces?
Yeah, a couple. So are you using what size of brush are you using on the smaller ones? Are you enjoying using a bigger brush so it gets more of a bolder stroke, or are you going back in with tiny brushes? Or
yeah, I find that I like brushes that kind of have the size brush that can kind of make a petal in one mark. So most of the brushes I'm using are probably around a ½ an inch or a little bit smaller than that for these small paintings. And then of course, this larger painting that I'm working on, I'm scaling way up with the brushes, and they're like an inch and sometimes even bigger, 1.5 inches, something like that. But so yeah, that feels, that ½ inch feels like a really
good size. So yesterday I went out and painted and got caught in the rain, and it was really interesting. So I have this huge golf umbrella that's super old, and it's red and white striped. And so I found that I was mixing colors, and then I was having to lean out of the rain and look at the, what I'm mixing, and then go back in and mixing. And so I'm like, okay, well, I obviously living in the Northwest, need to have some kind of umbrella. And so last night, my husband and I were brainstorming. I'm like, well, do I get a white umbrella that adds one reflective light? And then, or do I get a clear umbrella? Or, it's just
yes.
So
I'm learning the umbrella world too right now. And you saw in the picture of the dogwood trees out here, I have that huge wide umbrella. Obviously, when you're painting on the go, you can't, I have that anchored in the yard or whatever. So I'm looking for, if you guys have recommendations, I'm looking for a really good portable umbrella.
It's tricky because if there's any wind, it's a nightmare.
That's the thing too. The umbrella's gone,
Yeah. Yeah. I think a hat with an umbrella is the way to go.
There you go.
That is
really good toggle underneath your neck.
Yeah.
But I was trying to mix colors, and it's all of a sudden my palette has water on it, and I'm like, okay, well that's an interesting technical issue. And so that I didn't even worry about the paper at that point because we're working on paper right now. But it was just
challenges of painting.
And I stuck it out. I spent 2 hours out in the rain, but it was just kind of I have holistic questions for Kimberly in the group, because it's funny issues that you don't think about until you're in the middle of it.
Yes, that's right. You kind of do, you learn, it's a lot of trial and error and learning and adapting. Then these problems come up exactly that you didn't even think that you could have when you're painting outside. So.
Yep. That's part of the beauty of it. It's a total risk that you don't control it all. Yeah. You're at the mercy of nature.
Exhilarating, isn't it? That it's terrifying and exhilarating.
Yes. Yeah. And that all adds to, that urgency, that feeling oh my God, everything's changing. And it's that energy. There's something about that certainly gets into the painting that I think is exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I'm working on has a little bit of metal. So there's this reflection, and it was, a very gray late afternoon. And now I was going to go back out later today, and it's sunny. It's going to completely change that metal surface. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, well, you know, what do I want to maintain, or where is it going to lead me, actually, is what it's coming down to, because that's what it has to be. But it's just a very fascinating process when you're out there working and you're realizing, oh, the next time I come out here to finish this because I had to stop, is like, it's going to be a completely different painting than where it's at now.
Yeah.
So.
And so, yeah, I think there's something too about kind of surrendering to that and that loss of control. And sometimes, gosh, you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's like, oh, well, you know, on to the next thing. Yeah.
I bought
the word surrender.
I bought an umbrella setup a couple of years ago. It's called bestbrella.com. It's for painters. Comes with 3 different colors of umbrellas, like a gray one, a white one, and a black one.
Oh.
It clamps onto something. I haven't used it too much, but I just dug it out of my closet.
I ended up constructing my own out of an additional easel that then I can stake into the ground, and then like metal clamps with a big white golf umbrella. So it's like as heavy duty as I could possibly get.
Kimberly, I want a photo of that.
Okay, I'll send it to you. Yeah, it's pretty dang heavy duty.
Yeah.
And I pack it all into like a soft guitar case. And when I'm carrying it around, it looks like I've got like a rifle or something. Right. I look like a hunter.
Good. That'll keep all the people that come up and want to talk to you while you're painting and disturb.
Yeah, keep them away. Exactly.
I really like working on the ground as well, and I really like working small as well. And I'm so heartened to hear that a painter that I respect so much shares those proclivities, and that I'm not like weird for crawling around on the ground. I noticed in a lot of your process images, when you're outside, you are working with an easel. And I find that I am really easel averse. I like to like hold my painting in my hand while I paint it, if it's small enough. And I think part of it is that I just have not been able to like figure out how to use an easel. I mean, that sounds so stupid, but to always have to be looking past it, or you know, just that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you thing to negotiate, right?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds so silly, but I see you using your easel, and I wonder. I mean, it looks like it's pretty far down on the ground with you. Does it kind of go all the way down? What's the story with your
different easel? So I have one that I take outside that I stand up at, and then I also sometimes sit down on a stool, and then sometimes I'm painting on the picnic blanket with a tabletop easel that I put on the ground. So yeah, it just kind of depends. But I completely understand what you're saying about kind of like the burden of the easel, and
it's just one more thing to negotiate.
Yeah, but saying though that you're using a tabletop easel on the ground, Kate, that might be helpful to you.
I think that might be the ticket, because I have this big standing one, and I just don't know how to, if I'm up here and what I'm looking at is on the ground. Yeah, it's not, it's a simple technical narrative issue. Yeah.
I mean, the beautiful thing about push-showed boxes is that they both can be taken off of the tripod and be a desktop thing, or they can be placed on the tripod so that you've got both options.
Yeah.
And well, one thing that I do too that I think is important to mention when I'm sitting on the stool or when I'm sitting on the ground or standing up is I back up a lot to look at how my painting is reading, to make sure that I'm not getting too absorbed in little picky stuff that's taking away from, you know, the overall light situation or whatever I'm trying to capture. But yeah, I think sometimes when you're that up close to your easel, you can get kind of carried away and stuff that may not be so important to the painting. So
and I appreciate as well how many different times you acknowledged that that when you're painting from nature, you have to acknowledge the nature of nature, which is that it changes. So when those little buds fell off the tree, or when the season abruptly shifted mid-painting, and then that sort of decision of how much to alter what you've already done to accommodate it. and how much to just shift your goal for the rest of, you know, to integrate that change.
Absolutely.
How and where within the composition to integrate that.
Right. And I find that really to be almost the biggest challenge is making those big decisions. Again, that when you're painting in the studio, you just don't really have to address as much.
Yeah, because you have the safety of the thing to return to. So it's like you can sort of go back, backpedal.
Or 5 years to do this thing, or you could take 5 years doing a landscape painting too and watch how it evolves. And
yes,
that's an exciting idea too. But very different.
It's exciting with your new larger painting that a lot more of that is coming into play, right? Because there's like no way to do that in one shot in a way. So all the changes and collaging of perception that's going to happen. It's exciting. We'll be watching for sure.
Yeah, I want to follow up on what you said about the changing in the landscape where you added the blue sky at the end. It was interesting because like the grass actually did look like, or the meadow looked like it had sunlight on it. So even though it was overcast before, so was it just kind of like, even when it was overcast before, like basically you're making the decision that it could work, even if the sun just came out with the colors before, right?
Right. And I don't know if that was a conscious thing, but maybe the painting was kind of telling me that I kind of could have the like permission basically to put this in and still had it kind of be cohesive with the whole.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I have another two like very short technical narrative questions. One is, are you starting with OMS with the washiness because it looks like more streaky, or are you using the medium throughout?
I use the medium throughout.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Yeah, and even some of those first layers, those are actually sometimes mixed with my Gamsol. Actually, just
that's my question.
On there, yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And then, are you pre-mixing sort of like, for example, the greens? Are you pre-mixing like yellowish greens, bluish greens, and then like, do you have piles, or are you brush mixing the whole time?
Yeah, it's so a lot of times I will. When I start a painting, kind of find a few large masses of color, and I will make a few mixtures, big piles with a palette knife. And then I can kind of branch out from those. And I do a little bit of brush mixing for smaller shapes and things as I go. But if I need a big area of paint, yeah, I'm making like a big batch with a palette knife on my palette.
Thank you.
Wonderful. One more question.
I had a question about, I was just so struck by your comments on the violence of spring. That just really resonated. And I'm just wondering how, like, as you're painting perceptually, and then you're also like those ideas come in, how you're holding those as you're working on the piece.
Yeah, with that painting, the kind of budding daffodil painting, that first one I talked about with those shard-like leaves, I did feel like I was kind of emphasizing verticality with my marks more. Like if you look at the space around the plant, everything is like moving up. All the marks are up. And so does that answer your question? That's kind of one way that I showed that in that painting. And I talked a little bit too about some compositional choices. I guess those were kind of decided beforehand, not during the painting, but about how I was going to frame the plant in order to show it kind of bursting out of the canvas or potential room for growth. But I do think that, I don't even know if it's something that is kind of like planned as I go, but I think there's kind of just like a gut reaction. If I feel like something's moving upward, that I'm just naturally going to kind of like, you know, push the paint upward. Yeah.
Thanks.
What strikes me, Maureen, I love that question. And Christina, what strikes me about your answer too, that I love, is that there are these ideas, like a very poetic idea, like the violence of spring. But how you're handling that is through the language of painting. All your answers are formal, right? It's verticality, it's mark making, it's how the thing fits in the rectangle, right? That's the language of painting. Otherwise, those ideas just float away, right? As a painter, it has to be rooted in that technical narrative and how you make the thing, how you build the thing. That's one of the beautiful particularities of what painting is. It's wonderful. Christina, thank you so much. I feel so inspired, and I'm just thrilled that we got to hear from you. And I'm just, yeah, thank you very much for your time in preparing the lecture.
Thank you so much for your questions and for listening and having me. Are you all, is this the end of your class for today? Or are you
not quite. I'm going to have actually all of us go ahead and log out, and I would like everyone else to meet me back on this Zoom session in about 15 minutes. So at 11:15, it's actually 10:55 right now. So 20 minutes, I guess, if everyone can meet me back here so we can decompress a little bit. I have some things I want to go over, and I want to show some images that you guys have been working on just so you can have a sense of what's going on in the group. So yes, please meet me back here at 11:15. And again, thank you so much, Christina. And I'll be sending you this recording so that you can have it for your records as well.
Fantastic.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
That's great.
Thank you.
I feel like if Kimberly could say when she's giving a lecture, and she was talking about plein air, and she talks about color, and she talks about atmosphere and light and shapes and starting small, that she would say like, let me just pluck someone out of the air to illustrate my points and do it so perfectly. It was you. So
that's very, very kind.
Thank you.
This has been an absolute blast. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll see everyone else in a little bit. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.